This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Welcome back, everybody. I am super excited today because this is going to be the first in our new series of photo assignments for 2020. Now, these are going to be a little bit different than the way I did them before, if you participated when I did them about a year ago or so. In that series, what we would do is they were more like challenges with instruction involved. So I would have one video where there's some instruction, and then there would be kind of this challenge involved. People would submit their images, I would share them, so on and so forth. This time around, we're going to take a little bit more of a deep dive into this, and I think we're going to get used to a lot of learning. I think this is really going to be a fun process. So this first part we're going to be talking about is going to be about available light. Now, this will progress. We're going to do some exercises around available light, and we're going to really do some exploration this week, and then this is going to lead into still life work and then some portrait work as well. Now, you can start by doing still lives if you want to. I'm going to explain the assignment in a second, but I want to talk first a little bit about available light. I have done videos before on W. Eugene Smith, who was one of my favorite photographers. Kind of a funny story. So he used to get asked quite often, do you ever use available light? In other words, people thought that all he did was using a flash. Of course, he did a lot of different kinds of things, and he was always answering, of course I use available light. I use a flash. I use a window. I use whatever's available. Knee slapping hilarious, I realize. But I bring that up because understanding how light works is kind of universal, whether you're using natural light or whether you're using artificial light. I want to draw your attention to several photographers in this video who used a lot of available light or window light in composing their images. The first one, and I will put a list of all these books, there's going to be 3 of them in the show description, or if you just want to look at some online resources, I'll supply you guys with some links as well. But this is a Czech photographer. His name is Josef Sudek. He was very well known, often referred to by his nickname as the Poet of Prague. He did a wide range of work, but he's also known for doing these still lifes in his home studio in this big atrium window. So I want to begin with Sudek because what I want you to see in these images is that every time he photographed, it was all done deliberately playing with light as the subject usually. Now, I know these are still lives and it might be a glass of water or it might see something with a flower in it, but I think that the subject really in these photos is light, and you can see how there's different scenarios in which he's using light, how it interacts with objects. There's a lot of stuff that he did with refraction and reflection and things when you have water involved in a glass. Very simple setups, but very interesting images. Now, what's interesting about this is that I mentioned that what we're going to be doing is a lot of work from home right now, that if you can start to understand concepts, this will scale up. And I think you see this in Sudek's work as well. When it scales up, light is always a key component of these images. One of my favorite photos that he did that has a great atmospheric look to it was actually executed by getting light to pass through dust. And so basically he and his assistants were basically stirring up as much dust as possible to get this look. But anyway, I think there's a direct relationship by what you see with the more subtle, smaller still lifes and what you see with the larger scale, outdoor, architectural, environmental type images. And as we get into using available light, we will get into doing still lifes. And this is a great book to check out. I'm a big fan of artist monographs like this one, which is just a career compendium, because I think there's just so much you can learn here, much more than kind of an instruction manual. So these are all books I highly recommend. I realize, and I've done this my entire career of making videos, when I show books, people watch these later, the books are out of stock, and so sometimes that happens, but I'll give you some online resources too, because these images are pretty well known and not too hard to dig up. But anyway, that's Josef Sudek. I also want to bring up one of the first photographers. This is Henry Fox Talbot. This is a collection called First Photographs. He's widely printed. It's pretty easy to get a hold of his work. Henry Fox Talbot was one of the early guys. Most of you know that the first photograph was Nicéphore Niepce, who was a French scientist, and that is the oldest surviving photograph. There were other people at that time trying to develop a fixed image on paper. He's just the one that survives that we know today as being the earliest. But there were 2 individuals later who brought photography into the commercial realm and basically made it available to all. The most famous is probably Louis Daguerre. Second would be Henry Fox Talbot. Both of them were working around the same time. Louis Daguerre got his recipe out first, and so he kind of gets a lot of the credit. But I think Henry Fox Talbot, for me, is a much more interesting photographer because he was also a wannabe artist, at least. He used to say that he was very open about the fact that he couldn't draw, and he wanted to be able to make art, but by using a camera or a lens or some kind of chemical chemical process to make that work or that image fixed on paper. So it's a very different perspective. But what's cool is when you look at these. Now, these are really early photographs. Some of them are just photograms. They're an object that's just exposed to light on paper, like lace or even leaves. And what's interesting is he had no point of reference. There were no photographers really that came before him. There's no body of work. Photography was not a quote-unquote art form. It's not something you would see in museums. There was nothing that existed. So he's literally working from nothing into an artistic medium. The second thing that's really important in understanding Talbot is that the papers and the materials they were using back then were not very light sensitive. You know, today when we talk about ISO or its gain on a digital camera, we have an enormous range in the fact that we can shoot using very fast shutter speeds in very low light, sometimes pretty much near darkness with very little light in the scene. That was not the case with this early stuff. It had to be done outdoors. It had to have long exposures, sometimes several seconds, sometimes longer. And so it's a very different process. And so light is an integral component to that. The other cool thing about Talbot is I know that these are very low dynamic range. They're very lo-fi images. They're salt prints is what a lot of these are. But what we see is actually a work that's treated as an object. These weren't reproduced by the tons. They were done one-offs, and they all have a specific tone or color to them. And I think that's what makes them very fascinating. Some of them are these deep reds. Some of them are sienna type blue types of things. I think that you have to consider these not only for the photo that they represent, but also as an object. And that's important as we go through too. It's important to print your work. It's important to treat images not just as stuff that I did on the camera today, but is trying to achieve a specific desired result that ends as a work of art. And finally, I want to give you somebody in a more modern context. This is one of my favorites. I've talked about him many times in these videos over the years. This is Tom Baril. I got to meet Tom about a year ago, which was kind of cool. That was like a really wild moment. I was really nervous, and he's the man. Anyway, Tom got his start as a printer. He was Robert Mapplethorpe's printer and did a lot of Robert's major works during the height of his career. Anyway, in about the 90s, he started doing his own works. And what I love about Tom Baril is he has this nod to the past, this respect for the history that came before, but he does it within a modern context. Now, one of the things that he loves doing is he refers to it just as tabletop photography, but I think of it as still life photography. And again, just like Sudek, when you understand lighting principles and when you understand subtleties and how to bring that out, this also translates into large-scale works. One of my favorites in this book is an image that he did, well, a whole set of images he did on New York City, but this one in particular was taken from an empty office space. But it still gives you context. It works with light. I just think it's a great picture. The other cool thing about Baril, some of my favorite pieces of his are very simple. They're with items you can find at a grocery store, like these pears. This is one of my favorites because it's very even lighting. This, by the way, was done with a pinhole camera, so this is probably indoors, I would say. It's probably about a 45-minute exposure, but it works with light. He was using Polaroid Type 55 film, which had a really low ISO rating of 50. And anyway, some really awesome work. This book is almost near impossible to find. This was printed. Some of you might remember a record label called 4AD, who did Cocteau Twins and a couple other bands. Anyway, 4AD, the guy who ran that record label, was a big photography fan, and they wanted to go into doing books, and they only did a few. I believe there were 2, and this is one of them. So it's very difficult to find, but he was very widely represented in galleries during I'm talking about Tom during his career, and you can pretty easily find those on the internet, so I'll give you some links to those as well. So now that we have some context here, I want to get into the assignment portion of what we're going to be working with this week when we talk about available light. And so there is going to be some exercises we're going to do. I want to explain those, but first of all, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor today, who are the awesome folks over at squarespace.com. Present your photography using Squarespace's modern professional portfolios. The layouts are completely customizable, and you can use Squarespace's drag and drop based backend system, which is really easy to use to present your work the way that you want it seen. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform for building beautiful websites, easily claiming your domain or URL, and creating a custom site that brings your ideas to life. Squarespace is host to a number of other tools, including e-commerce, appointment scheduling, and analytics, so that you can grow your brand and your following. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, you can go to squarespace.com/AOP to save an additional 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Once again, that is squarespace.com/AOP squarespace.com/AOP, and I want to thank the folks at Squarespace for sponsoring another episode of The Art of Photography. So in working with available light, the first thing we need to do is a bit of a deep dive and discovery into what light is going to do through a window during the day. And I'm going to refer you back to Sudek on this. If you look at these images that he did, these are very deliberate. They're very incorporated. He didn't just set up and go on any of these. The light is such a key element in these. He was definitely working with the specific time of the day, knowing what the light was going to do. Of course, these were in his home studio, so it was a location that he was very familiar with. Just, it's kind of similar to how I work when I do these videos. I have this big window over here, and I know what the sun's going to do, and I know what times are not good to record. I know how to adjust for it, so on and so forth. It's the same concept we're going to apply to photography. So we got to know what the light is going to do. So what I would do is pick one location in your house that you feel is suitable for shooting, let's say, still lifes or portraits. You have a little bit of room to work. I realize that some of you may have a lot of window options. I would not go crazy. I would pick one because it's going to just be easier to keep track of. Some of you don't have as many window options, and so, well, your work's cut out for you. We're going to have to deal with what we've got, and so that's going to be really important. It's going to be dependent, too, on if you live in a very dark place. You're probably going to only have a few hours that you have adequate light to actually shoot in, and I would also look for the opposite when you're going to have really hard light coming in a window, because it's going to behave completely different. Now, you should be able to get great images out of any situation, and so that we're going to get into that as we go. So the first exercise here, what I want you to do is we're going to pick a window, and I want you to document this throughout the entire day of daylight hours, every hour. So this may seem a little extreme. You might want to leave a tripod set up. If you want to shoot a subject, if that is making you feel like you're accomplishing something, that's fine too. Or you could just document the space, because what we're looking at for this very first part of this is I just want everybody to understand what your light is doing throughout the day. So that way we can get a better handle on it. We can predict it, at least for the time being. When the seasons change, light does different things too. And so these are things to be aware of. And I think this is also, it has a foot in the world of landscape photography, because landscape photography is not just set up and go to. Sometimes it can be, but you're normally reacting to the surroundings you have and the environment that you have and the lighting conditions that you have. Or if you have a shot in mind, you need to know what the light's doing during that time of day. So we're going to keep this very controlled. So this is just part one. We are obviously going to be working into doing still life images, and we're going to do a lot with composition when we get into those. And I also want to do some stuff with portraits, but those are going to be later on down as we go down the line with photo segments. Right now, we need to document and we need to find out what the light is doing. I know this is kind of slow and meditative to begin with, but I think this is a great place to start. So there's no images to submit or anything yet. Again, I want to make sure that we're all learning on this. This is the goal right now, is to actually get this under your hat, not to just show off on the internet. So there'll be time for that, I promise. Right now we are documenting. So we are documenting what light is doing in the window throughout the day. So what I would do is you can set up a tripod. You can get a camera, try to shoot from same angles, or maybe you can explore different angles, but you just need some record that you can refer to using Lightroom or whatever photo editor that you're using, just to group your images. You can use Adobe Bridge if you want, use a folder of images, but we need to be able to see what it's doing throughout the day. That way we know, okay, if I want this type of shot, this is when I can go get it. So that's our start. Let me know what you guys think. Drop me a comment below. I'm going to be working through these with you, so expect to see some videos throughout the week where I'm actually bringing this up and showing you what I'm doing with this. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Until then, later.